Hello friends, welcome back to my channel KUMAR Programming. Today from Angular interview question series, we are going to learn about promise versus observable. First we will see the differences in between promise and observable, and then after that we will see all those differences in the practical demonstration. So let's start. Promises and observable. Promises and observable both are used to handle asynchronous JavaScript request. Now we will see the differences in between both of them. So first difference is promise is a part of native JavaScript. On the other side, observable is part of RxJS library that is also known as a reactive extension of JavaScript. Promise is having two callback. One is the resolve and another one is a reject. Resolve is the success one and reject is the failure one. However, observable is having three callback: success, error and complete. Promises are eager loading. It means it's getting loaded once it's created. On the other side, observable are lazy loading. They're not getting called until or unless it's not getting subscribed. Promises return always single value using next. On the other side, observable returns multiple value using subscribe over period of the time. Promises are non-cancelable. On the other side, observable can be cancelled and unsubscribed. Promises always behave as a asynchronous. However, observable behaves asynchronous and synchronous both. Promises don't support any operators. On the other side, observable supports operation like map, filter, reduce, retry, replay, for each and many more before it's getting subscribed. Okay, now we will see all those differences in the practical demonstration and then after that it will be more clear. So now let's flip to the Visual Studio. So friends, here I have created a simple application. In this application, I have created a component, promise observable component, and on its HTML file, I have created a container. Inside the container, I have taken the three buttons. One is for creation, one is for execution, and another for the cancellation. So in this creation, I'll create a promise and observable, and then I'll execute it, and then I'll cancel it. Okay. So now let me run this application. Ng serve -o. -o is basically used to run the application in the browser. So it's going to open directly in the browser itself. So it's serving my application now. Yep, see, it's automatically opened in the browser. Now if you see here, I have created an application. In this application, going forward, what I'll do, I'll put all my concept over here, so it will be at the centralized location and you guys can access it. Okay, and here I have created a promise observable component for this. So if you see here, I have taken a button creation and another for the execution and another one for the cancellation. And we will see all the differences over here in the promise and observable one by one. Okay, so now let me move to the its TS file. So here if you see, I have created a method as a creation, execution and cancellation. So in the creation, let me create a promise. So now here I'm going to create a promise. Let me create a variable for promise, new promise. Promise is a part of JavaScript only, so we don't have to use any library for this. And promise always take two parameters. One, if you see here, one is resolve and another one is the reject. Okay, so we will pass the resolve and reject callback function here, and these two callbacks functions is going to be inside the fat arrow function. This is known as a fat arrow function. And now here I'll just log promise created. Okay, so here my promise has been created. Now I'll create a observable. So here I'll just put observable and I'll create observable, and this we will pass one callback function as an observer, and here we will log the value as a observable created. Okay, so now if you see, this promise is already there. Okay, we have not added any library for this, so this is the part of JavaScript and which is being included in the Angular as well. But if you see, the observable is not part of JavaScript and it's not part of Angular itself, right? So this is not, the module is not being added over here, so we have to add the additional module that is known as a RxJS library. Okay, this observable is part of RxJS library, so I'm just going to add the RxJS. Okay, so if you see, I have to add the additional module for the observable, that is a RxJS. So my first difference is that promise is part of JavaScript and observable is part of RxJS library. Okay. And the second one, promise take the callback as a resolve and reject, where observable take the callback as a success, error and complete. Okay. So this observer is having three callback function. Okay, success, error and complete. So we are going to implement it. Now I'm going to create callback function for promise and observable both. Okay, so now here promise emitted value. Okay, and we will see the reject also, promise, error. Now we will implement the callback function for observable. Okay, so this observer is having three callback function. First one is next, where we are having the value, observable emitted value. Now observable error, observable error, observer dot complete. Okay, so complete is not taking any parameter, so you can see here this complete is not having any parameter as well as return type void. Okay, so now we have implemented the callback function for promise and observable. Promise is having resolve and reject, and observable is having next, error and complete callback functions. Okay, now let me format the code. In order to format, we have to use the control KF. Now let me run this application. So this is already running. Now I'm going to click on creation button. If I'll click on creation button, if you see here, promise created. Okay, we have not executed the promise. As of now, we have just created the promise. However, it's getting called. Okay, so this is, so what does it mean? Promise are eager. Okay, it's loaded whenever we are declaring it. Okay, if you see the other side, observable is not called it. Okay, because its observable are lazy. Okay, and they are not loading while it's creation. Once we are subscribing it, once we are executing it, then after that observable is going to call. Okay, so now if you see that the second difference is callback. Promise take the callback as a resolve and reject, and similarly in the observable we have a callback success, error and complete. And the third one, promise is eager loading. If you see here, this is eagerly loaded. We have not executed it as of now, just we have created. And other side, observable is lazy loading. Okay, so now we will execute it. Okay, in the execution, we have the promise here. So this scope, promise and observable scope will be inside this function itself. So now let me declare this promise variable at the class level here. Promise equal to promise is type of promise, and inside that it's taking a string. And now we will do for the observable. Observable is a type of string. Now we can remove this. Now we are taking this promise and observable from the class level. So we have to be used as a this dot promise, and here we have to use the this dot observable. Okay. Now this promise and observable can use in this function. Okay. So now this dot promise dot then. Okay. So whenever we are returning the value from the promise, we have to use then. Okay, and then inside that we have to pass the fat arrow function data. I'm simply logging the data here, and similarly we will execute for the observable as well. Okay, so this dot observable dot subscribe. Okay, so in the subscribe we have three callback function, next, we are passing the data from here, fat arrow function, console.log, we can pass the data here. Okay, now the second one, error, and third one we have complete. Okay, we are not having any parameter for the complete. Observable completed. Okay, so now here on the execution we are calling the promise as well as we are executing the observable both. Okay, now let me go back to my application. So first of all, I'm going to create my promise and observable. So I have created my promise and observable. Now I'm going to execute it. So if you see here, observable created. Now once I'm subscribing it, then it's going to create the observable. Okay, and observable emitted the value. So let's flip to the Visual Studio. So here we have reject and error method is being called without any condition. So we will put some condition over here. Const is error, we will put some static value as a false. If is error, then after that it's going to be called as a error callback. Okay, in the same way we will do it for reject. Okay, now let me go back to my application. So here I'll create my promise and execute it. So now if you see here, my promise created and my promise emitted the value, and observable created, observable emitted the value, and observable completed. Okay, so here this promise takes the two callback function as a resolve and reject. On the other side, observable takes three callback function as a success, error, and complete. Okay, and if you see here, let me refresh it. As soon as I clicked on creation, my promise gets created. Okay, we have not executed my promise. Okay, just we have created our promise, and while creation it's getting executed. And similarly we had created our observable, but that is not created it. Okay, it's getting created once we are going to subscribe it. Okay, that's the reason we say as a promise is eager loading, eager in nature, and our observable is lazy loading in nature. Okay, now we will see our fourth difference as a return single value using next, and observable return multiple value using subscribe over period of time. Okay, let's flip to the Visual Studio. So now here I'll use the set time interval, set interval function. Set interval, set timeout, both are the JavaScript function which are used to achieve the asynchronous functionality in JavaScript. Okay, JavaScript is a synchronous programming language but can be asynchronous using our asynchronous functions as a set interval or set timeout. Okay, so here I'm using set interval and I'm passing a callback function here, and I'm putting a timer over here as a 1000 milliseconds. Okay, and now I'm going to emit the value inside the our set interval function, and I'll emit one more value here, value 1 and value just to differentiate. Okay, and similarly we are going to use here set time interval inside the observable as well. Okay, and we are going to use the timer as a 1000 millisecond, which is equal to 1 seconds. Okay, now here this returning value. Okay, next, so here I'm returning value 1. Yep, this is also this, so we have to just show this is being called over period of time, which is returning a stream of data. Okay, now let me go back to my application. So here I'm just creating my promise and observable, and then I'm executing it. If you see here, my observable completed. Okay, my observable gets completed here. Okay, so in order to show that, I'm just going to, because this code is getting executed before execution of this code. Okay, so I have just commented this. Now let's go back to my application. Here I have created my promise and observable, and then I'm started execution. Okay, so if you see here clearly, promise created and promise emitted value. So here promise is emitting only one value. Okay, so see here I have returned two values, but I have get it only one. Okay, however in the observable, if you see, we are getting the value over period of time. Okay, so after 1 second it's emitting the value, so it returns the stream of data. Okay, so if you see here, my observable as continuous emitting. So here we have a provision to cancel this observable. Okay, so now let me show you how we can cancel this or unsubscribe. Let me go back to my Visual Studio. Here I'll create a subscription. I'll put a dollar sign as a suffix, then I'll take it as a subscription. Now this subscription, whenever we are subscribing any observable, it's returning a subscription. Okay, So this dot subscription equal to, so now we have our subscription. Now inside our cancellation method, this dot subscription dot unsubscribe. Okay, very easy, isn't it? Now let me format the code. Control A, Control K, F. Okay, so now my code is formatted. So now let me go back to the application. So here I have created my promise, then executed my promise and observable. If you see, my observable are continuous emitting the value. So now if I click on the cancel, then my observable is getting cancelled. Okay, it's not getting executed further. But if you see, my promise got emitted the value. We cannot cancel that promise. Okay, we can cancel that observable, but we cannot cancel the promise. So in order to show that, let me just execute this code inside our set timeout function, and I'll give the here 5000 milliseconds, and I'll execute this over here. Okay, and similarly set timeout, and I'll give the 0 milliseconds over here. I want to execute this immediately. Okay, I'm putting as a 0 deliberately because I want to execute this immediately, and I want to execute it after some time, so I can show you that this cannot be cancelled. Okay, so now let me save it and let me go back to the application. Here I have created my promise and observable, then I have executed, and immediately I'm going to cancel it. Okay, so if you see here, still my promise emitted the value. Okay, however, I have cancelled it after 5 seconds. It emitted the value. Okay, and my observable are getting cancelled. Okay, now see the difference is promise are always asynchronous. However, observable behaves asynchronous and synchronous both. So if you see here, promise are getting created and then promise are emitting the value in the last. Okay, but however, observable created and observable emitted the value. So now here my observable is getting behave as a synchronous. Okay, and promise is behaving as a asynchronous. Now go back to the application. Here I'll call this function after 2 seconds, and I'll call inside the set timeout. I'm going to make this subscription as a asynchronous, so I'll be calling both of the function after 2 seconds. Okay, let me go back to the application, creating, executing. Now you'll see my promise created, promise emitted. Okay, then observable created and observable emitted the value. Okay, so now my promise and my observable are behaving as a asynchronous. On the other side, promise are always asynchronous in nature. Okay, if you are not able to understand that why I'm saying synchronous and asynchronous handling here, just comment me. I'll make another video on that where I'll explain that how event loop, event queue, and how worker threads are working together in order to achieve the asynchronous functionality in Chrome V8 engine. Okay, now let's move to the another difference. Promise do not provide any operators. Okay, on the other hand, observable provide operators like map, filter, reduce, retry, replay, for each, and many more. Okay, here I'll show you how to use the map and filter operators in observable. Now let's flip to the Visual Studio. So in order to demonstrate that, I have created a service here, backend service. Inside this backend service, I'm calling this URL. I have created a backend API. If you see this, and I have already deployed this API in my local host. So this is the user detail that we are getting from the web API. Okay, so I'm calling this web API from my backend services, and here I'm returning as an observable get user list. Okay, so when you are calling any services, okay, services are returning an observable. Okay, they are returning observable or promises. Okay, so here for the observable, I have just returned the observable from the HTTP GET request, and from the promise, I have called this GET request for the this particular URL, and then I have converted to it to a promise, and I have returned it a promise from here. Now let me inject this backend service in my component. So here I'll come to the constructor, private backend service, type of backend service. Let me import this backend service here. Now here I have my backend service. So here I'll just comment this code. Okay, and I'll call the promise from the backend service. This dot promise equal to this dot backend service dot get promise user list. Okay, so now this is going to return the promise. Similarly, I'm going to call for the observable as well. Okay, so I'll just comment this complete observable code. Okay, and here I'll call this dot observable equal to this dot backend service dot get observable user list. Okay, so from here I'm getting the observable and here I'm getting the promise. Okay, so now here let me move this code out from the set timeout. Okay, I'll move this down and let me move this out from this one as well. Okay, let me move this code down. Okay, so now here we are calling our promises and here I'm calling my observable. Okay, now let me see in the application if we are getting the user list or not in both of the cases. So now creation and execution. So if you see here, this is the result that we are getting from the promise and this is the result that we are getting from the observable, and after returning the result my observable got completed. Okay, now let's go back to the Visual Studio Code. So here in promise we don't have any option to write a filter, okay, to apply any operator here. Okay, but in case of observable we have. So what we have to do, before subscribe I'll write a code for pipe. Okay, in order to apply the operator we have to use the pipe, and inside pipe I'm going to use first map operator, and inside the map operator I'm going to pass a parameter callback function for users. That would be a callback function. So if you see here my map is not added so far, so I'll just add this map function from RxJS. Now here we have to use, now from this user that we have passed, users dot filter, and what we have to filter over here. So inside the filter function we have to pass the parameter as a user, which would be type of any, and then fat arrow function, and here we have to write the condition which user that we want to filter it out, right? So user dot id. Okay, user dot id is greater than 5. Okay, so here we have the observable. We are using the operator, map operator and filter operator by using the pipe. So inside the pipe you have to use the operator. So we have created a pipe and we are using this map. We are passing the entire user. Inside that entire users we are filtering that specific user which are having the user id equal to greater than 5. Okay, so I hope this should be working. Let me see to the application now. Create and execute. So we are getting here result as a undefined. So now let me see what is the mistake we have here. So here we are using a user filter. So let me use the directly user filter here, and this user filter user and user.id is greater than equal to 5. Okay, so basically here we have to use the return, which should return the users. Okay, because we are filtering it, right? So now this should be working, and after that once it's got filtered, and then after that we are subscribing the value. Okay, so now let me see once again in our application. Git refresh. Yep, so if you see here, this is all the result that we are getting from the promise, and now here we got the result as a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All IDs are greater than 5. Okay, so here we are using, so here observable supports for the operators before the values are getting subscribed. Okay, so we can apply the filters and we can filter all those things, and then after that we can subscribe the value. So this is all the differences that we have in promise and observable. I'll make a separate video to differentiate in between synchronous and asynchronous request, and I hope you understand that differences in between promise and observable. So friends, if you have learned, then please don't go without subscribing it. Your each and every subscription gives a lot of motivation to me. So if you have not subscribed this channel, please subscribe it and don't forget to press the bell icon so you can get the notification of all of my upcoming videos. That's all for the day. Have a good day. Bye bye.